All right, we are back here on the show now to look at a game that we had previewed last Wednesday in the Vikings and Falcons game. So, you know, I predicted the Vikings to win. I thought they just had a better team. It was going to be too much for the Falcons defense, and I was right, but even still, I didn't think it was going to be like this, man. Like Sam Darnold to get 5 touchdowns and Kirk to continue his struggles. We hyped this up to be Kirk Cousins' revenge game, but his old team, showed Kirk and, the Falcons why they were perfectly fine, moving on from him and not giving him that 4 year, $180 million deal, especially with their new quarterback, Sam Darnold, playing the way that he did, not only in Sunday's game, but the games leading up to it as well. But Kirk Cousins' return to Minnesota ended in a 42-21 complete domination by his former team. The Vikings extend their winning streak now to 6 games, and they stay 1 game behind the Lions for the NFC North. While the Atlanta Falcons, on the other hand, continue to trend in the complete opposite direction with their 4th straight loss, and Sunday's loss means that they drop out of first place in the NFC South, which means now that the Buccaneers are in first place, and I believe they're the 4th seed right now because of the fact that they beat the Raiders, and now the Buccaneers obviously have a better record than the Falcons, which is pretty hard to believe considering at one point the Falcons were 6-3. They had already beaten the Buccaneers twice, and with the injuries that the Bucs were dealing with, you're thinking, or at least I thought, that the Falcons were going to cruise to a division title, but things really started to spiral out of control. And yeah, I mean, like the main story before we get back to the Falcons is that Sam Darnold had a fantastic game. He achieved a career high in passing yards and passing touchdowns because of a 347-yard passing day and 5 touchdowns on top of that as well, both career highs, like I said. And on Kirk Cousins again, it is now over the last 4 games, it is now 0 passing touchdowns for Kirk with 8 interceptions in that time. At the beginning of this losing streak, I thought, it's a rough game. It's fine. Then another one happened. I'm like, all right, that was bad, but they're still in a decent spot. They got to pick it up. Then the third one happened. I'm like, all right, like, who are they playing next? Because they got to win their next game. Oh, they're playing the Vikings? All right, this thing is really not looking good. And the Bucs, I'm not saying that they had the easiest schedule, but, they had favorable games coming up. So it really just turned on its head. And a lot, in large part on that, not only in this game, but overall, I think you could see the disparity in the defense certainly, but the offense is really struggling with the way Kirk is playing right now. And I mean, you look at the weapons that we talked about in the preview that the Vikings had. Jordan Addison and Justin Jefferson in this game became the first duo in Vikings history to each have 100 plus receiving yards and 2 plus receiving touchdowns in the same game. And this is the same franchise that had Randy Moss and Chris Carter, as a duo for their franchise. And these guys, just created history in terms of duos. That's a big deal. And not only them, but, TJ Hawkinson, he didn't have the greatest of games, but he still had a lot to say. Jalen Naylor's a nice receiver. Then you add Aaron Jones. And if Sam Darnold continues to play like this, man, like, he's going to have a lot more fans on his side, despite the fact, there is that lack of playoff experience, but it's hard to ignore what he's doing right now. But in terms of the game, I don't want to pin it all on Kirk and how, he's playing, but, the Falcons also had 12 penalties called on them for 127 yards, which is the most against any team in the NFL this year. And, overall, it was, you think of 12 flags, that's a lot, especially when the Vikings only had 6 on the day as well. And it's weird because in this game, the Falcons actually started winning. They were up 7-0. They got an early touchdown in there, but right after that, they failed a early 4th down. And then from that point where they missed that 4th down where they didn't convert, Minnesota scored 2 plays later, so it's still tied. It's not the worst thing. At worst, by going for it, you're back to square one. So it's 7-7 at this point. But then Minnesota really, took it to them leading into halftime because the Falcons tacked on a field goal, but the Vikings tacked on another touchdown. And after the Vikings missed a field goal, the Falcons missed a field goal. Both teams exchanged a touchdown right after that, and we were all tied up at 21-21 in, the midway point of the second half, or somewhere in the third quarter, right? After the third quarter, excuse me. After the third quarter, it was still 21-21, despite the fact that it felt like the Vikings were, or should have been up a little bit more. Forget all of that. It was still 21-21. So, the Falcons still have a chance here, but then it all really broke loose in the fourth quarter for Minnesota. The Minnesota Vikings in the fourth quarter scored 3 touchdowns to Atlanta's fumble, second interception of the game, and a turnover on downs. The fourth quarter belonged to the Minnesota Vikings and really made this game look a lot worse than it really started off as. Through 3 quarters, it was still 21-21, but the Vikings, really blew the roof off the place in that fourth quarter. 3 touchdowns, adding to that 5-touchdown day by Sam Darnold, and it ballooned the lead to 42-21. Obviously, the Falcons were held scoreless in the fourth quarter while everything turned to gold for the Minnesota Vikings. But overall, what I'll say about the Vikings, they're 11-2 for a reason, right? You don't just kind of stumble into it, right? Of course, the crazy numbers are great, and putting up big numbers like that is awesome. But I really like how we've seen this performance from Sam Darnold on top of the close wins that we saw previously against the Bears and against the I'm forgetting it. I'm gonna look it up real quick, but I forget who it was. It was the Cardinals and the Chicago Bears. Those 2 close wins for the Minnesota Vikings. I like that we saw those on top of this sort of performance, right? Because with Sam Darnold, the question was, can he make those big drives? Can he have those game-winning drives that you're going to need eventually against some of the best teams? And he showed it, whether it be against the Cardinals, knowing what we know now about them, and the Chicago Bears, the worst team in the division. It's still something, right? In a game where they could have easily lost those games, right? Sam Darnold, stepped up and made the game-winning plays. But also, to show a performance like this, a complete domination by him, 5 touchdowns, over 340 passing yards, to know that you can have it, both ways and show both ends of the spectrum when it comes to quarterback performances and what you want to see out of your signal caller. That's what I really liked about it, because, the close games are great. Knowing that you can win those are awesome, but also knowing that you're able to take full advantage of your weapons and blow a team out just in the fourth quarter based on a lot of the plays that you made as well. So I like seeing both aspects of it from Sam Darnold. But now we get to the Falcons and kind of closing this segment up by just saying it looks bad right now, obviously, because you lose 4 straight, but it's not all lost, right? It's not entirely just in the trash, like you can't reverse it. The Falcons' next 3 opponents out of their last 4 games are the Giants, the Raiders, and the Panthers. So there is hope with that, to kind of catch up there, right? You can beat the Giants, you should beat all 3 of those teams, right? And looking at their 4th game, or their 4th opponent, you have the Washington Commanders in Washington, so I would probably side with the Commanders in that game. But the Giants, the Raiders, and the Panthers, you should be beating them if you want to get into the playoffs. And, we're talking about the Commanders, and they hold the last spot in the playoffs. So if the Falcons really want to prove that they belong in there, they have to go out there and beat a playoff caliber team. They just got to do it. Because at this point in time, I don't want to say that they're being exposed right now as, not a good team, but it's looking, pretty severe at this point in time with the Bucks, surging to the first place in the division, and the Falcons right now sitting in 9th place, right behind the Rams. So it's not like they have next dibs. They still got to get through 2 teams essentially to get into the playoffs. While the Buccaneers, we're talking about the Falcons' next games and how, relatively easy they are. The Buccaneers have to play the Chargers in Los Angeles. They got to play the Cowboys in Dallas. They host the Panthers, and then they host the Saints. So I would say the Falcons have it a little bit easier in that regard in terms of who you're playing and how it affects the other team. But it won't mean anything if Kirk's not playing better, and I think that's going to be the first step. So getting him to resemble what he did during that stretch where the Falcons got to first place in the division is the most important thing. And, you have three teams here that are going to be picking probably top 5 in the draft. So what better way to do it than in these next couple of games? If you don't, then you don't deserve to be in the playoffs. So that is what we took away from this game. Pretty remarkable, final result there by the Vikings. But, they continue to cruise along while the Falcons look for answers here quickly to try and save their playoff aspirations. But speaking of playoff aspirations, we're going to talk about the Seahawks and the Arizona Cardinals. Why the Seahawks win means that the Arizona Cardinals are done, and also, are the Seahawks a lock to win the division, or should we still watch out for one team that is creeping up on everybody in the NFC? We're going to answer that question when we return after this break.